Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to the webinar on Reimagining the Workplace post-COVID-19, Structure, Roles, Practices, and Competencies. Businesses are grappling with increasingly complex issues. Till about February of this year in India, our regular business issues were an economic slowdown and business as usual challenges. Till the first wave hit us, initial issues were more around protection, communicating with the customer, stabilizing business chain. But soon we realized that this will not go away very quickly. The world is in a deep economic recession, and for many of us, business survival has become a big question. As we get close to the lockdown being uplifted in most parts of the country, the next big question is how to restart without endangering our people. And finally, the biggest question facing us is even if we are able to survive this for a few months or maybe a year, has the world changed permanently? Is there a new normal? What impact will that have in the workplace? This webinar aims to highlight major changes that can be expected in the workplace in the coming future. It's an absolute pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Garima Sharma, who's one of our panelists today. Garima is an assistant professor at Anderson School of Management at University of New Mexico. She obtained her PhD from Case Western Reserve University in corporate sustainability, followed by a postdoc from Ivey Business School in Canada. Her research focuses on sustainability and related tension of purposes and profits. She teaches strategic management, ethics, and decision-making. It's equally a great pleasure to introduce to you Reetu Raina, who is currently the CHRO at Quick Heal Technologies. Reetu has held various leadership roles in Sterlite Technology as head of HR for network software, and also with Amdocs in Asia Pacific. Reetu holds an MBA degree with a specialization in human resources from University of Pune and executive leadership from Asst Hyderabad. Welcome, Garima, and welcome, Reetu. It's a great pleasure to have both of you. I will be your host this afternoon. I am Protima Sharma. I am a managing partner at PeopleWiz Consulting. My firm works in organization design and HR solution for entrepreneurs and enterprises. Before we get on to the questions, there are certain social rules. This is in a webinar mode, so all attendees are muted. Please use the Q&A section to submit your questions. Your questions will be visible only to you and the host. I would encourage you not to use the chat option, but focus on the Q&A section whenever you have a question in mind. The panelists will speak for about 40 minutes on the topic, followed by a Q&A. You can keep adding your questions during the session, and I will ask them on behalf of you. The session is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to all attendees. In case of any internet interruptions, we've planned backups. I would request you to please be absolutely patient. So let's start with the very first question. To you, Garima. As we prepare for the new normal, do you see any lasting impact on how businesses operate? Will COVID-19 fundamentally alter how we continue to work?
All right, I thank you. For that question, and before I begin, I just want to thank you for inviting me. It is really so exciting to be here. Before we begin, I want to add just a tiny bit to the amazing introduction that Protima just did. So I teach business strategy, and my research is in sustainability and CSR. So you will see that I'm always trying to bridge the two, so I'm sure you will see that in my responses as well today, that, if there's one thing that I hope you take away from what I say is that business strategy and social and environmental issues are not different. I also love that I'm from academia and Reetu and Protima are from practice. So I think the most useful knowledge is one which sort of bridges this research practice divide. So I will bring somewhat of an abstract ideas. My hope is that they will push your thinking, and I'm just so grateful that Reetu and Protima will keep us grounded by bringing the concrete how-to. So in many ways, we will be sort of co-creating these ideas in real time. So Protima just asked about the new normal and lasting impact. So the one thing that I would like to say in that regard is that this pandemic has showed us even more that social and environmental issues are business issues. So if you think about business action in this current pandemic, such as laying off employees, or not really giving health benefits, or not caring for employee well-being, it has really wide implications on your business. And this pandemic has shown us sort of the reality of that in terms of employee productivity, retention, and even organizational reputation. So if you've been following the news, food delivery apps in the US like Uber Eats and DoorDash, they're sort of suffering from a huge reputational disadvantage right now because they're using this pandemic to charge really high fee from the restaurant and sometimes also from the customers. So they've sort of, for them, this whole increasing their revenue in terms of current crisis and really not protecting their gig workers has brought them very, loss in their reputation. So as opposed to, many other businesses who are seeing this pandemic as an opportunity to really think about how they can not only use their current capabilities, but also thinking about how can they pivot their businesses in order to do good for the world, but also sustain in this current pandemic. I'm sure India has many examples of some wonderful businesses doing that. And I would love to hear from some of you in the Q&A if your organizations are doing that. But one example that comes to my mind is a UK-based gin manufacturer, Gin 58. So they soon realized that, instead of making gin and making liquor, they can use their production processes to really make a sanitizer. Actually, they're calling it ginitizer. So the larger point here being that they were nimble enough. Their business model was nimble enough. They had business development teams that were nimble enough to see this pandemic as a call to pivot their business model and really capitalize on, not in a bad way, not in a way that I just described that these food delivery apps are doing, but in a way that really helps the world too. So just in terms of sort of what we take away from that is that as a business, your choice is either you appreciate that social and environmental issues are business issues, you integrate the two, and you have the nimbleness and agility in your business model to be able to pivot and, still sustain and possibly even thrive in this crisis. The last thing I'll say is that, and I've been thinking about this more and more, about how quickly this pandemic hit the top line of so many businesses. So one thing that I want to underscore is that probably the whole idea of lean, mean, just in time is an oversell in many ways, because it's clearly not working in a pandemic. So we need some buffer, we need some fat in our business processes. We all of us have survived without a 2-day delivery. So as business leader, how can you account for events such as this? You have created a very efficient, very lean business process, but then how can you add some of that buffer, add some of that fat into it, so that if we ever face such a shock again, you are able to respond to that in a way that helps you ride over that shock. So I'm going to stop there, and I would love to hear from Reetu.
Okay. Thanks for these observations, Garima. I quite agree that it's time to look for opportunities that are lurking within the challenge that we've been facing. And what would you say, Reetu? Do you see any impact on the way we operate?
Yes, of course, there is an impact. I would say saying there is no impact would be a biggest denial we will do ever. Because, whenever there is something changing so drastically around us, it has a purpose and it has a meaning, which has to change us fundamentally as a business. And I think there are many things which were theory till today, and suddenly they are becoming a reality for us. And one of the things which I always feel, since the I would say evident of technological disruption, one of the things which organizations has been talking about is about ambidextrity. And they always used it as a for the companies who wanted to bring disruption, who wanted to really keep R&D away from their day-to-day, because there are two models always operating in the business. The question which always businesses grapple with: I am making profits today, will I continue making profits for future? So now in that process, if you look at many companies who have really done good disruptions, whether it is Apple, whether it is Google, so they had certain ambidextrous rules in place, which would mean that I would keep those moonshot projects away from my day-to-day, and I will maintain my day-to-day BAU as an efficiency model, because this moonshot is something which I want to do an investment for future, and eventually as and when it realizes, both marry together, and I don't lose for today and I don't lose for future. So now if you look today, the moment we go to offices or 2 or 3 months down the line, will the world be same? The answer is no. You can't change a business leader or a business strategy in 3 months time, because there has been a lot of thought process which has gone into those business models. So the first question which they will have is, what was my strategy 3 or 4 months back? Where was I kind of pegged to be? Now, with these changes around me in the ecosystem, am I really going to do a course correction? If you look deeper, this is nothing but application of ambidextrous principles, which is telling you that there is one reality, which was your reality 3 months back, and there is a new reality which has changed your business models. Now, when you go deeper into ambidextrous strategies, you talk about isolation, you talk about self-regulation, you talk about the context. I think all of these things will start coming in play. Now, how do organizations move forward? The first question is, we should not be frozen by this, because I think the biggest success for any business is to hold two contradictions at the same time in their head and still make a headway. Because when you have two things which are so different fundamentally, which is post-pandemic and now pandemic, you will start struggling. I think the ability of the businesses to make decisions faster and allow pre and post to continue together. And just picking on the example which Garima gave about Genitizer. Now, if you look at this organization, their reality a few months back was something different, and now it is something different. Now, of course, post-pandemic, there are two realities that are existing at the same time. Now there's a learning. How do I balance between the pre and the post and still make a headway? So when I say back that there is a theory, ambidextrous strategies were a theory applied to pockets. Now it will be a reality applied to every business. And trust me, there will be no theory which will stay. Everything will be practical, because, I remember even in the month of Jan and Feb, people were talking, will this have an impact? Will it go so, harsh? Will there be a lockdown? And, we used to have chats amongst colleagues. Oh, India can never go to a lockdown, right? Now it's a reality. We're living into it. So I think that ability of the leaders to hold the two thought processes at the same time and ability to make decisions to move forward is something which is going to stay and continue for sure.
That's great, Reetu. Thank you for that. And just to summarize quickly on this particular question, this is a massive challenge, but it can bring meaningful change and unique opportunity. The pandemic has shown us that social and environmental issues are business issues. I think we also should be prepared for how lasting changes in human behavior can affect our customer needs and expectations. I think we would be washing our milk packets with soap and water for a very long time now. Digital consumption, whether it is for online education, training, it has increased multifold in the past few months. Retailers have changed their business models overnight, trying to be right outside the consumer's door, yet contactless. Whether you are a B2B or a B2C, being able to discern your customers' pandemic-fueled needs is going to matter. It is literally the time to think, am I in the right business? Will my delivery model sustain against these changing client needs? And as Reetu rightly put, the need to be ambidextrous, multi-skilled, that as a response to operating maybe with a reduced workforce, that has changed the way both employees and employers will look at a job. People who have invested in ERP have a head start, as virtualization of business practices will be akin to survival. A huge uptake on automation is expected. Business continuity, safety, well-being, which were considered topics for maybe a support function, will become more mainstream. Cybersecurity is another area that will see a huge jump. Governments will gatekeep flows of goods, services, finance, labor, when national strategic interests are at stake. Indeed, we should be ready for a new phase of gated globalization. Let's move on to the next question. Specifically, when it comes to organizational structures and roles, what are some of the trends that we should prepare for? Garima?
So one thing I would say here in this particular case and in general, as a community, when we move towards some of these solutions for the current pandemic and innovations going forward, we really need to think in terms of an entire system. We can't really just look at the problem in front of our eyes and ignore the unintended consequences that our actions would generate. So I'll just talk about one. People in terms of organization structures and rules, work from home keeps coming up as a solution, or probably even a forced coping up with your situation kind of solution that all the organizations will have to adopt to. So that's one. So the work from home is here to stay, and all the discussion is really around sort of the technology that enables us to work from home. What I want to take you and push your thinking a little bit is also to think about, if we do that, what are the broader dynamics that we as either HR people or managers or really citizens of the world need to think about, when we adopt this simple practice. So one clear dynamic is relational dynamics in organizations. It is not rocket science to think about that we're going to lose a lot of those relational dynamics, but research also tells us that it can have real consequences for employees. So recent research showed that they took employees from a travel company and they randomly divided these employees into two groups, and one group worked from home and the other did not. It was a travel company, and so they could really track the productivity metrics. And they realized that sort of the employees that worked from home showed a gain in their productivity, but also on the flip side, the promotion based on performance fell for these employees. So they're clearly, the conclusion that the researchers were drawing was that, all the relational dynamics beyond the immediate performance metrics that go into, developing an employee or promoting an employee were absent. So as we think about, work from home is here to stay, we need to think about how do we reset our performance and reward systems. Then there are, so in addition to sort of the relational dynamics, which are still close to work from home idea, there are these institutional issues, which are even farther, and we often think that they're not a part of our decision making. But I want to sort of invite you to think that maybe they are, and they must be a part of our decision making. So one of the institutional issue is that, does everyone have equal internet access? It may sound very simple, but there is streams and streams of data that show that many people do not have. Maybe if you're working for a software company, if you're in a certain class of workers, you may have, but it's highly likely there's another class of worker that does not have internet access. So should government be making internet access a basic human right if we are fundamentally shifting our work processes to work from home? Then the last is even going further from relational to institutional, to thinking about working from home. It can actually be a public health issue. So New York Times recently reported in March that there is a huge spike globally in domestic violence since the lockdown. I'm in academia. We are judged by how many research publications we put out there. The people are already seeing a downward trend for women academics, So there's a lot of gender-based implications when you think about both partners working from home. It might not be equal. So that's what I sort of will leave you with, that, even this small practice of working from home does have this relational, institutional, and maybe even public health issues. So how us as leaders can think about, when we think about changing organizational structures and role, think about it broadly in terms of the consequences it'll have for us.
And that is so right. Yeah. We need to look at remote working from a much broader lens than just productivity and efficiency. What do you feel, Reetu?
Yeah, I think, thanks, Garima. They are great points. If we look at, I would like to go slightly behind in the time. And if we look at the organizational structures and the roles, the way they have been carved out has been from the previous era, an era of industrial era, I would say. And eventually this boom of technology comes in and which hits us, and the speed of change is very fast. And suddenly this concept of work from home, value-based outcomes and everything starts popping in. But if we look at the world, it was still in a cusp, because as humans, we have a tendency to stay in a very controlled environment because we want to control, we want to see the things, are they happening, are they not happening, am I seeing the employee or not seeing the employee? So I think we have lived in that dilemma for a while. What has happened is that, we tried to drive many concepts, like, I remember holacracy, when it was started many years back, and Zopos really did it successfully. But it all stayed as a theory, and it worked very well in startups till you have 50 to 100 employees, because you are talking about smaller teams, you are talking about empowered teams, you are talking about faster decision making, you are talking about cutting the analysis and all that. But apart from few organizations like Zopos, not many organizations could do well there. And eventually they gave it up. Now, the question which we need to ask ourselves is that what happens post-pandemic? There would be a need to really, I would say, drop behind the legacy structures and the roles which were there because we felt comfortable with that. An example like, Garima mentioned that dropping the promotions, because as leaders, we felt comfortable with the person being around. We felt comfortable with the face value. Now, that is very, very important to see what is something which I need to drop behind. And if I have to make concepts like team of teams and all that really successful, I have to be an outcome-driven organization. Now, the biggest challenge is, you have a goal and you have a means. And sometimes in the journey, we tend to forget the goal and means start becoming more important to us, because means are activities. They are shorter, they are smaller, easy to monitor. And, it becomes, I would say, the basic design for all the processes of review mechanisms. But eventually, when we move to a structure like teams of teams, when we move to a smaller structures, when we move to a holacracy, it means giving up a lot as leaders. It's, as leaders, we feel power in decision making. It means giving up the decision making. It means letting, doesn't mean that you are giving values, but it says that the basic fundamental thing is hire capable people, decentralize, deliver, and let them run. And more than anything else, as a business strategy, we need to have a room for us to have an appetite to allow people to fail. Because, when you create empowered teams, there comes a responsibility and there's a possibility of failure. So I think creating those holacracy, which was, again, I'm going back to my earlier point, a theory or a nice to have or something successful in pockets, might start becoming a reality as a structure, because we will be going through the roller coasters and it will keep happening. And we will have to start moving more into the value-based organizations. And one of the things I want to quote example from an IT industry, DevOps as a philosophy, many organizations have been trying for many, many years. But one of the things which people say, what makes DevOps a success is not the process, is the mindset. And is the ability to allow people to do the things they want to do in a regulated, small, pocketed environments. So I think, again, a theory which has to come to their practicality. So I would say that, holacracy, smaller teams, self-regulated teams is something which is going to stay, and it will be more outcome-based organizations which will make success eventually going forward.
Thanks for that, Reetu. You're so right. When a bellwether like TCS says that by 2025, only 25% of employees' time will be at office, I think we have to take notice of the changing winds. Remote work is here to stay. We have to make it work. Companies are training their workers on effective remote working, video call etiquettes, virtual collaboration, and just plain old how to take initiative and not look for instructions all the time. I think in 2015, retired US Army General Stanley McChrystal published a book titled Themes of Teams. It chronicled his effort to reorganize the fight against Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And it showed that a decentralized model can be effective even in a traditionally hierarchical institution like the US Army. The concept has been around for some years, but I believe its time has come now. We can no longer rely on one person to take all the decisions, and there have to be leaders at every level. I would also add that I see a lot of new roles emerging in health and safety, compliances. I think the regulatory environment will change on a much faster pace than usual. Where we used to abide by regulations and labor laws to save on fines, I think companies will now develop protocols to ensure survival and confidence of employees as well as customers. Recently, McKinsey surveyed plant managers in China to understand the protocols that are being followed, and here is what they found. Factory worker safety, staggered working shift, workers sitting spaced out and facing in the same direction during lunch to reduce the risk of infection, temperature screening, sanitizer, physical distancing, decontamination, worker availability maximization through covering cost of travel, relocation. And also inbound supply. Suppliers, manufacturers, and customers have shared resources proactively, given mutual dependence they have, including PPE, idle transportation, asset, and personnel. There are many different things that were tried in China, and we will be in a situation where China was in March, maybe by May. So there's a lot to learn from there in terms of the protocol that can be introduced in the manufacturing environment as well. Let's move on to the next question. What are some of the innovative organizational practices that will help employees adapt and change? Garima, what's your opinion?
So I don't know if this practice is innovative, but it's quite basic. I would start with being kind, being kind to your employees, being kind to those who work for you. In the short term, there are lots of fears and anxieties that are probably not even work related, but your employees are facing those, and that could affect their work, especially in this time. So just show empathy. I think encourage them to sort of take time off from work, even if there's nowhere to go. Don't have these early morning check-in calls where they may be juggling childcare responsibilities with work. Don't make video calling mandatory just because you feel comfortable seeing someone's face, because an employee may not have a home office. She may be working from a small corner of her room, and she may not want her colleagues to see her private space, So these are really small changes that organizations can make, I think, to support their employees. And in fact, I saw a question come in the Q&A about, that your plants are still running because they're essential. It is essential work, and how can HR play a role in this scenario? So, I mean, in my mind, HR is really sort of this boundary spanner between management or leadership and the employees. And, in a normal case scenario, you balance the interest of both parties. But I think in this scenario, the employees have very little voice and very little sort of power to make changes because they're in a very precarious situation. So, I mean, my, sort of call to action to you would be to really step up and show empathy in, watching out for employee interest, so that they can do their job and see them as a whole person. I think in the long run, a practice, again, I don't know how innovative it is, but, just talk to your stakeholders, including your employees, as you're thinking about pivoting and restarting your business, so don't take all the decisions as a leadership team on your own. Involve those who are closest to the problem, which are usually your employees, and involve them into those discussions. The more I sort of hear these discussions, they all center around, using technology. And we have to remember technology is just a tool. It may be a platform for business models, but it is not your business model. So include your stakeholders, include your employee as you think through in this new normal, what will be your value proposition, what are the processes for value creation, and how will you capture that value in this new normal.
That's great. And Reetu, what would you say?
Thanks, Garima. So I think one of the things which is really, really very important for us to understand is that we will have to eventually, as organizations, move to a structure, where there are not hubs of powers or hubs of decision makers. Because when you create hubs of powers and hubs of decision makers, what do you actually do? You increase the dependency models in the organization. Now, there are two ways to look at it. Either it can be there because of the capability, or it can be there because it was a process which was followed for many years. I think the basic fundamental question which we have to ask ourselves is it because of the capability or the value, or is it because the process was followed for many years? And when we start, asking ourselves these questions, we actually move to this model of holacracy, where we say that it is not few who can take the decisions and make the needle move, because eventually you are creating a pyramid and you are creating a kind of a paralysis below because of the absence of that person. And when, whether it's a manufacturing or a technology setup, you have to take decisions, and decisions are very important for a part for us to move forward. So what we do is really create small flexible structures where we have clear roles and accountabilities, and they are flexible. It's not that you're bound by that particular role. You actually start becoming what I said earlier, move from activity to outcomes. So automatically, when you move from an activity to outcome, the format of your meetings change. You start, becoming more, what am I going to achieve? I think, some time back, there was quite, I would say, publicized and talked about that Amazon has said that they want to stop the presentations. When you come for a meeting, don't create the presentations. So, if you look again deeper, it's a meeting format. What's the presentation? You're creating an analysis, you're creating a process. But the moment you become outcome driven, you have one-on-one conversations. You talk about the problems and you don't talk about the processes, and you start moving forward. And eventually there has to be an autonomy, because you have to give autonomy because someone has a capability to take that decision, irrespective of the level of the hierarchy this person is. Now, autonomy does not mean that you are not bound by the regulatory things. You are not bound by what the organization's value system is. You are bound, because I would say self-regulation is much higher difficult than delegation. And that is the place where many people mistake that working in a holacracy is about freedom. It's not about freedom. It's about I taking the accountability and feeling the empowered. But again, it's about the organizations who will encourage, because the first step I think the leaders have to take to give the autonomy and let people become empowered to take the issues to themselves and cut through the bureaucracy. And eventually, if they have to now move forward, they have to really look at the decision-making process, which can't be again skewed to few. So eventually, what do you do? As an organization, you have a regulation, but you create empowered, self-regulated, flexible structures who are focused on the outcome, and eventually helps in moving us forward much faster. And if you look at the scenarios like work from home, remote working, virtualization, this will give you results much faster, because you will have less interdependencies and you'll have faster decisions, and of course you'll have faster outcomes.
Thank you for that, Reetu. You're so right. Just to summarize, a business reset starts with kindness in communication, and self-managed teams also are here to stay. Additionally, I think there has been a series of articles from Harvard to show how work portability will get very popular, especially to man mission-critical work. For example, Bank of America has converted more than 3,000 employees from across the bank into positions where they're fielding calls from the customers. they've been flooded with calls from small businesses and their consumers, and these people have now been deputed to handle these calls. Companies like Cisco, they've already had an internal gig marketplace, kind of a marketplace for internal assignments. When there is a hiring freeze, you can actually split one job to 5 part-time experiences and offer them to 5 people. Another innovative idea is industry talent exchanges. This has already started in a big way in China, where employees from badly hit sectors like restaurants, airlines, they're temporarily loaned to sectors that see a spike in demand, like essential retail, logistics. A classic example is that of Alibaba's retail grocery chain, which engaged hundreds of employees that used to work for 2 restaurants chains in China. We'll move on.
I think there's a question from someone which is maybe related to talent portability. The question is about, in this current scenario, there are many people at the lower rungs who are losing jobs. And, when these people are losing jobs, it is really difficult for the HR to help them to cope up with losing jobs and how to deal with. And I think it had an answer in your point. So that's the reason I stopped it here. When you talk about the talent portability, what we are saying is that there is the jobs are not cast in the stone, which are bounded by certain, I would say, key areas or responsibilities. What we need to have, we need to talk to our employees is about the employability concepts. How do they help in creation of the values? And as organizations, we have not to lose the human angle, and we have to be flexible enough to create the job portability within the organizations so that we are able to offer opportunities to these people. They might be coming from a different backgrounds, but you can always give a cross exposure to them and help them to move. And unless until it's really a difficult technical skill which cannot be moved. But I think organizations with their responsibility towards the society will have to start driving the job portability more in terms of helping the employees to cross skill, upskill, so that they are able to take various opportunities within the organizations itself, unless or until, there is no way out because it's happening cut across. So I think that's something which we have to build as a mindset.
Yeah, you're so right. And you're so right that instead of looking at a job as, we used to be highly functional. So this is HR, this is finance, this is accounts, and this production, these are workers. But I think time has come to look at jobs a bit more holistically, maybe look at parts of the job and divide them amongst people, or create teams or create new kind of roles for them. So that's the need of the hour now. And looking at traditional job functions is not going to help organizations. I completely agree with that. Okay, so let's move on to the next question then. For Garima, do you see any differentiating competencies that companies should focus on building to survive as well as succeed?
Yeah, I see several. If you could save the slide, I'll tell you to move. Protima, I'll tell you to move.
Sure.
So sure. So I see 2. One is what I'm calling, or what people call systems thinkers. So we need even more of these system thinkers in our organizations now, and not just at the leadership level, but also at every level in the organization. So what really is a system thinker? So at the top of the hour, when I begin with sort of taking this idea of work from home and then really moving back and seeing sort of the relational dynamics, institutional and public health, that's sort of one example of systems thinking, that you not only just look at the parts, but also you can zoom into the parts and zoom out to see the entire system. You also see sort of the interdependencies between the parts. So it's not just each part is separate, they all are connected, So I think employees of tomorrow can see such interdependencies, This is an important skill or competency at any time, but I think it's even more so now. The other that I would say is what's called a paradoxical mindset. And Protima, if you want to move to the next slide. And this aligns very well, I think. So a lot of my research is on paradox intentions. It aligns very well with what Reetu was saying at the beginning around ambidexterity. So this idea that you can really hold two contradictions together. So if you look on the left-hand side, it says either or mindset. And if you follow the arrows, all of us in our organizations and also in our lives are sort of faced with these pulls, so you have to take care of yourself, but also you have to address needs of others. You have to work faster, but avoid errors. You have to follow the rules, but be original. You have to learn skills, but also use your current capabilities. So, we all face these tensions. So one way to respond to this tension is with an either or mindset, saying that I can either work faster or avoid errors, and usually that gets us stuck into a dysfunctional response because we're sort of trading off one from the other. We are highly likely to feel that we cannot move ahead. In contrast, there's this paradox mindset that says that tensions are a part of organizations, tensions are a part of our lives, and sort of we start with accepting those tensions. And then the idea that the tensions are here to stay, it's not something that we can solve, but we have to continuously navigate, So in a paradoxical mindset, you're comfortable with the tension and you're continuously looking to navigate, so you can learn new skill, use current capabilities, you follow rules and be original, and each organization has its own set of practices. And if you're interested in knowing more, I'm sure Protima will share these resources, but there's a fair bit of research that has been translated for practice in showing how one can adopt that paradoxical mindset.
Okay, great. That is so apt. I think most of us are in the middle of a paradox. As you're forced to take decisions to reduce workforce, yet concerned about employee well-being. I think it's comforting to know that it's okay to experience this kind of tension. What would you say, Reetu? Any differentiating competencies that you see for the future?
I think one thing which will become all the more important going forward is about the empathy. Because, there was a lot spoken about empathy by the Microsoft CEO way back. But I think post-pandemic, it's also going to be equally important. How do you really empathize with the ecosystem and with your employees? Because, businesses have cycles. And it is not that first time we are seeing any such, I would say, untoward things happening around us. It has happened in the past. There has been recessions, there has been ups and downs. But any business, if really it wants to sustain for the long run and create a brand for itself, empathy and how do they act in these times is what is really, really very important. And as Garima said, ability to hold the tension and move forward. It's about don't get frozen. Take small steps, but keep taking decisions and move forward.
That's great. So yeah, you're so right. Some of the behavioral competencies, system thinking, paradoxical mindset, adaptability, agility, and speed, which were always important, but now they have taken center stage. Just to probably a note on the communication part and the empathy part. If we take a cue from our political leadership on communication, here is what I see. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, she embraces science. She's clear, logical, she inspires trust, whereas the Brazilian president, the Bolsonaro, he rejects science. I think he's treating the virus as a little bit of a nuisance. The US president, Donald Trump, his daily briefings, they're a spectacle, and we don't know what's going to come next out of, what he's going to say. Whereas our own Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, though he doesn't talk to us every day, but he does talk to us at regular milestones, almost telling us what to do and trying to bring us all together, even as we stay isolated. The New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, she does FB Live in a sweatshirt, almost, standing next to the average New Zealander. I think the jury is out on which country will flatten the curve. But the approval ratings show that it is the leaders who show kindness, empathy in their communication style. When they say, I am with you in this, they are able to influence people's behavior way better. I think on the technology front, the evolution of technology is famously hard to predict, very hard to say. But if you look at some of the skills that are still being hired even during the slowdown and the lockdown, are cloud mobility, network management, IT security. A lot of hiring in content writing is happening. There's been a huge uptake in that. I also see product design skills as another area that can see a massive movement. An Italian company, Avio, published how flying would look like in future, whether it is masks for the hearing impaired or self-cleaning toilets. I think designers are thinking of innovative ways to ensure social distancing and hygiene. And that's going to stay. I think that's going to become more and more important as we go forward. So what is the single most important advice that you would like to give to the audience? And maybe this time, Reetu, we will start with you first. What is it that you would like to say to everybody?
I think, I want to start with the answer to the question which has come up from someone.
Sure.
I think the question is that from Avinash, she's saying that the gap between the management and the stakeholders and the rest will be increased. They will not know how to realign the priorities. And this is exactly what I was going to talk about. If you look at the navigation till now, every business would say, this is my goal. And do I have a competence for this? Yes or no? And they would decide to go and communicate it to the people. Now, if you look at this way of working, it's about a logical, a technical way of working. Now, when we look at a pandemic or when we look at any such situation, so they are not technical problems, they are actually adaptive problems. And in adaptive problems, you actually have to really go deep core inside you. And even before talking about competence, talk about what is my commitment to this. Because if you become clear about the commitment, if you become clear about the purpose, you will figure out the competence. And once you figure out the competence, you will have a conviction in communication. And I just want to give a very simple example, what we have seen recently. When we did the first Janata Curfew in India on 22nd of March, no one had a clue what is going to happen. The first thing was, do we as a country have a competence to go for a complete lockdown? The answer was no, right? And if we communicate to people, it will only create and add to the chaos. Now here, if you see the circle, what we followed, how did we reset the country as a country? The compass is, what is my commitment? Is my commitment the economic loss? Is my commitment the lives of the people? And if I am clear about my commitment, I will figure out the competence. And we saw very nicely how the competence was defined. Your trains were converted into the quarantine centers. Right? So you had created, I would say, hospitals out of nothing. So we started building competence after being clear about the commitment and the purpose. And rather than that, if this problem would have been handled in a more technical way, the first question is, we as a country don't have competence. We are not a developed nation. We are not rich. So competence on a scale, we are just on a 3 and 4. And how do we communicate? I think that is going to be the resetting of compass for all the organizations. Who will have to, going back to the question asked by Avinash, that this gap will increase. Yes, in a scenario where I start with competence and go to communication. I think the successful leaders and the leaders who really want to take it to the next level, they will start with the commitment and be very clear about the commitment, because that defines their why. And then they figure out the competence, and then their communication has a conviction. And you know what, when your communication has a conviction and right intent, people will follow through you, and they will help you to navigate through all the tough times. I think that is what is really going to change going forward. And it is the way the companies will have to reset their compass.
Great. Reetu, if I could just take one question that is coming from a gentleman in the audience. How do you see employability? So I would rather ask, how is it that all of us who are maybe, a lot of us who are employees, how do we become more employable post-pandemic? All of us are worried that there would be job losses. So what is it that we can do to become more employable as the events unfold in front of us? What would you say?
Okay. So I think, first of all, when we say job losses, yes, there would be. some type of jobs will be lost and new type of jobs would be formed. So that's the only thing that is going to change. Now, it's up to us as employees. Do we want to see the half truth or do we want to see the full truth? So we have to see the full truth, which means X will go, Y will come. And again, that is the reason Harvard is doing so much of research on the talent portability, which is about how do you look for new avenues of learning and how are you increasing your value proposition and how flexible you are in your own careers. Now, if I am very hard bound that my career path has to go from XYZ, from a manager to senior manager and blah, 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 I think that will not hold any more true. It's about the skills I bring, how quickly I can learn, how quickly I can adapt. I think we have to, first of all, do two things. Keep our eyes and ears open to the trends. See which are the trends where our current skill sets are closest and the learning gap is the least. Pick up the learning curve and move forward. Because one of the things which can be disastrous post-pandemic is freezing, which is true for organizations, which is true for employees. None of us have to freeze. We have to be agile, be quick in decisions, see the full truth and move forward. Because only thing which will keep making this world a happier place is moving forward and not freezing. So I think that's the way I look at it.
Okay.
That is so true. And that's what's been going through my mind also. I mean, I resonate so much with this idea of some jobs being lost, but some being created. So I love that glass half full approach. And so something that I always tell the business school students who go through my classes is that, you know, us as individual in this time and place are our own brands, you know. So you need to create that brand for yourself, either through you know, showing your work, through social media, through your connections. So I think a big part of employability in this time and age is also creating that brand for yourself. So you know, maybe thinking in that direction too, as you may have more time on your hands now, how would you start creating yourself as that brand, whatever that may be?
Great. There's another question which is quite interesting. I think, Reetu, maybe you could take this. It's about, you know, flexibility versus rigidity. You know, it's quite interesting what is being asked about.
Protima, I was also reading the same question.
Yeah, yeah. Go for it, Reetu. Go for it.
Yeah, because, you know, this question is very interesting and I haven't faced this question today. I always keep facing it. But I think, you know, there is always this concept of acid test. I think this time is an acid test for organizations and for leaders. And when I say so, if we continue as leaders, as managers, or as organizations, continue to be rigid, you know, we know how the history will follow because there would be a possibility we will not exist anymore. So I think it's not the flexibility as a nice to have, but it is a must to have. And time is the biggest tester of it. If we don't become flexible now as organizations, as leaders, I feel sorry about the people who are not becoming because they will eventually find themselves nowhere. And the people who are adapting and becoming flexible faster and faster, it is, you know, they would be changing. And if you see the data, there's a lot of research around this. Look at the companies who extincted. What were the reasons? Look at the companies who grew so faster. What were the reasons? Always, it was not the hard skills. It was these basic leadership capabilities within that organization which led them to grow. Now, it's the choice of the managers and the leaders, which group they want to belong to. Now, this time has made it much more evident than ever that it's a question of no choice. We don't have any choice to continue to be rigid, and we need to be flexible and move forward. And if still there are people who don't want to, you know, time will tell.
You're right. You're right. Okay, great. So going back to my original question then, Garima, you're still on the spot. What is the single most important advice you would give to the businesses as they prepare to restart and refocus?
So I don't know if this is an advice, but this is certainly a worldview that I am personally getting more and more interested in. Also, a lot of colleagues around me are doing some great research. So the idea is that of thinking about time as a long present, So what does that even mean? So it means that crises or situation of resource scarcity, what it does to us is starts making us think in terms of trade-offs between the short term and the long term. So, as a business leader, you'll start thinking of, okay, should I invest in my R&D, which is a long-term investment, or should I keep my factory going right now? So the minute you think about time as these temporal short and long-term trade-offs, you kind of get stuck, and so changing that and thinking about time as the long present, which means that present is all there is to it, and present has a duration. So you're not thinking about, okay, what are my budgets and timelines and so forth from 25 years from now. You're thinking about what is my next step. So, I run long races. I don't know if any of you have run a long marathon, but, one strategy that they advise to the runners is that, there are mile markers at every, maybe in India, there are kilometer markers at every few kilometers, which takes you to the final end. So you do have the final goal in mind, but, they advise you to not obsess too much about every single mile marker so that your race becomes this one long duration, one long present, So it allows you to think about always moving forward and always moving forward in incremental steps. You think about your work as a process and not as a calendar or a timeline. And I think in Hinduism, that's always sort of been advocated to us about thinking about work and thinking about how you are in the world as a process. And, this picture that you see in front of you is of this, of Benjamin Zander. Many of you may have heard his TED Talk. He is an orchestra conductor. He's also a great pianist. And in this TED Talk, he's describing about, how a 7-year-old child plays the piano. So the child is sort of focusing on every single note. And then the 8-year-old has some more smoothness, and the 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old. So in terms of long present, there are two manifestations there. One is just, going from 7-year-olds playing to 11-year-olds playing is not just one milestone after the other. It's sort of a transformation. If you compare 7 with 11-year-old, you can see a huge difference, but you cannot chop that difference into stages. It's one big long present. And it also reminds us that when we listen to the music, we're not focusing on which note is which. We're listening to music. A music is one long present. So sort of leaving you with that, and as you reimagine your workplaces, reimagine yourself being, sort of a leader, how can you operate in that long present instead of trading short for the long term?
What a wonderful thought. I think it makes so much sense. The uncertainty is such that we can't think long term, and short term thinking never helps. So it is better to be in almost like a present continuous, taking incremental steps, planning your next moves. Thanks for that, Garima. There's a question that I'll take, maybe the last one, and then before we close, and Garima, Reetu, both of you can probably take a shot at it. Somebody's asked, how do we handle the psychological and emotional impact of lockdown on employees?
I think, first of all, we have to be ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
As HR, we'll have a very, very critical and important role for it. And first is accepting that there would be changes in the employees once they come. Acceptance will save half the problem, because you cannot say that, you haven't worked for so long, you have worked from home, now you work in double shifts. There is a lot of mental trauma which has gone in this process during this time. I think second is, after acceptance, is actually look at certain people or certain cases where you feel the impact has been much more deeper, and not leaving it there that, you need to be productive from day one, you need to deliver. Take up those individual cases and help them to move forward. And the third is, what is the language spoken in the organization? Is it the language of hope, or it is the language of despair? Because the moment someone is walking into the office, he is hearing words. These words are slowly becoming thoughts, and they are becoming beliefs in those people. So I think as leaders, as HR folks, we should be encouraging on what is the up curve which is going to come. And it is not about being optimist or pessimist, but I think if we have already gone through a downturn, this is not really going to help. So I think being mindful about the language, accepting if there is a challenge with certain people, and not really pushing them hard, empathizing with them. I think if we do these three things, it will really help us in creating much more happier workplace. And it is only the happier workplaces which are productive. It doesn't happen other way around.
Thank you for that, Reetu. Garima, would you like to add anything to this response?
I'll just quickly say that, being transparent is so important. I think anxiety comes from lack of information, and the more information you can provide, the more transparent you can be, I think the easier it'll be for your employees to cope up with what's going on. I'm a huge believer in the power of resources, like actionable things your employee can do to address his or her problems. So are there mental health resources? Are there other kinds of resources that your employee can really leverage? And it's sort of your job to make sure that they have those resources at their hand and they have the financial and other capacity to access those resources. And something that I've been doing in my own classroom and otherwise is creating a community. I think so many things get resolved when you see that others are in the same boat, when you see that, you can talk about your issues to others, when you see that you're not in this alone, So how can you, within your organization, create that community where people can reach out to each other and discuss their fears and hopes?
That's so great. Thank you so much for that, Garima. There's a sobering thought that I wanted to leave everybody with. And see, when we experienced the slowdown in 2009, many predictions were made. Time magazine predicted end of consumerism. General Motors predicted end of SUV. Predictions have a way of sounding definite. Some symptoms show up and then they could fizzle. There is value in looking at the future and thinking of possibilities, but it is equally important to remain humble and realize that the world is complex. As Garima and Reetu put it very nicely, we just have to keep moving forward. I would stop here. Garima and Reetu, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you everybody for being with us today in this webinar. We've been flooded with questions. We've tried to answer as many as we could during the webinar. I would ensure that you get a response to each and every question, maybe by tomorrow or day after. And we will be sharing the highlights of the session also with all of you who've attended the webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.